They thought their adopted black sister was nothing more than a shadow in their wealthy home. For years, she was silenced, ignored, and treated like she didn't belong. But when the billionaire father they all depended on died, a single letter was read at his funeral, shattering their pride and changing everything they thought they knew about family. Amara was only 6 years old when she was brought into the Thornton mansion, a sprawling estate filled with marble floors, glittering chandeliers, and servants who moved quietly like shadows. To outsiders, she was seen as the lucky child who had been adopted into one of the richest families in the city. But inside those golden walls, life felt colder than the streets she had left behind. Edward and Clara, the billionaire's biological children, looked at her with disdain from the very beginning, whispering cruel words under their breath and making sure she felt like an intruder at every family dinner. At the long oak dining table, Amara's seat was always pushed to the edge, far from the warmth of conversation, her voice drowned by their laughter. They mocked the color of her skin, her simple clothes, and the way she clung to silence when their cruelty cut too deep. The staff copied their behavior, following Edward and Clara's example, often treating Amara as if she were invisible. But despite the chill, one person kept her heart alive: Mr. Thornton himself. He would visit her room late at night, tucking her into bed and whispering, "You are my greatest blessing, Amara. Never let their words break you." He took her hand during family photos, stood up for her when others looked down, and reminded her that love, not blood, defined family. In his eyes, she was no different from his other children, and though Amara longed for the approval of Edward and Clara, she found comfort in his quiet, steady affection. It was his presence that gave her strength, the light she held onto in a home that constantly tried to dim her spirit. And deep inside, she prayed that one day her siblings would see her as more than a forgotten daughter. The Thornton mansion, once alive with the sound of clinking glasses and echoing footsteps, grew heavy with silence the morning Mr. Thornton passed away. The news struck like a storm. Headlines splashed across every newspaper, announcing the sudden death of one of the city's most powerful billionaires. Business partners sent flowers, politicians sent condolences, and cameras gathered outside the gates, but inside, the family was split apart by more than grief. Edward and Clara, dressed in black silk, whispered in corners about their father's fortune, their voices carrying more greed than sorrow. They barely looked at Amara, who sat quietly by the window, her eyes red from crying, her heart shattered in ways words could not explain. For her, the loss was not about inheritance or wealth. It was about losing the only person who had ever called her daughter without hesitation. On the day of the funeral, the grand hall overflowed with mourners, the air thick with the scent of roses and candle wax. Amara sat at the very end of the row, her small figure swallowed by shadows, while Edward and Clara sat proudly at the front as if guarding their father's throne. She clasped her hands together tightly, trying to gather strength, when suddenly the family lawyer rose from his seat. He held a sealed envelope in his hand, its edges crisp, carrying an air of finality. The murmurs quieted and all eyes turned toward him as he cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice solemn, before his passing, "Mr. Thornton left behind a letter with instructions that it be read aloud today, here, in the presence of his family and friends." The room stilled, hearts quickened, and Amara's breath caught in her chest. She felt something stir inside her, as though her father's voice was about to speak one last time. The lawyer's hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the letter, the rustle of paper echoing through the hushed funeral hall. Every gaze was fixed on him, from wealthy tycoons to distant relatives, all eager to hear the billionaire's final words. Amara sat rigid in her seat, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear the silence around her. The lawyer began to read, his voice steady yet heavy with meaning. "To my children, I have given you all the riches life could offer, but wealth without love is emptiness. Edward and Clara, you carry my name, yet you failed to carry the true spirit of family. You let pride and cruelty blind you, and for that I leave you nothing more than my memory. To Amara, my beloved daughter, whom I chose with my heart, I leave my legacy. The company I built, the mansion we lived in, and the fortune I earned, they all belong to you. Not because you are my adopted child, but because you are my true child in every way that matters." Gasps filled the room like a wave. Edward's face turned crimson, and Clara pressed a trembling hand to her chest, her eyes wide in disbelief. A ripple of whispers spread through the mourners as they shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Amara froze, unable to believe the words that had just been spoken aloud. Tears blurred her vision as her father's voice seemed to echo through her soul. For years she had been treated as though she did not belong, but now, before the eyes of the world, she had been named the heir, the chosen one. Clutching the letter in her heart, she realized her father had given her the greatest gift of all, not just his fortune, but his validation of her worth. The days after the funeral were filled with a storm unlike any Amara had ever seen. Edward and Clara, who once walked through the mansion with smug confidence, now prowled its halls like restless predators. Their voices thundered behind closed doors, plotting and shouting about lawyers, lawsuits, and stolen rights. "She tricked father!" Edward roared one night, his face red with fury as he slammed a glass against the marble table, shards scattering across the floor. Clara's eyes burned with bitterness as she spat. "How dare he give everything to her? She's not even blood?" The staff, who had once ignored Amara or looked past her, now shifted their loyalty, bowing respectfully when she passed, whispering, "Miss Thornton," with cautious reverence. This only fueled her siblings' rage further, making them feel smaller in a house they once ruled. Amara, though shaken by their cruelty, refused to let their venom break her. She walked gracefully through the halls, her father's letter tucked safely in her drawer, drawing strength from the words he had left her. At night, when silence wrapped around the mansion, she would sit by the window and whisper a quiet prayer, asking for courage. Edward and Clara tried to confront her, their accusations sharp as knives, but Amara met their hatred with calm eyes. "Father didn't love me more," she told them softly one evening. "He just loved me right." Her words pierced deeper than any weapon, leaving them speechless. The mansion, once filled with their mocking laughter, now echoed with their resentment and defeat. And though their hatred still lingered like a storm waiting to break, Amara carried herself with a dignity that even Edward and Clara could not shatter, slowly stepping into the role her father had always believed she was destined to fulfill. One quiet evening, Amara found herself standing in her father's study, a room that still carried his presence in every detail: the polished mahogany, the desk, the shelves lined with books he loved, and the faint trace of his cologne lingering in the air. The letter, now slightly worn at the edges from being read again and again, rested in her hands. She pressed it to her chest and whispered, "I promise. I won't let you down, Father. I will protect what you built, and I will live with the love you taught me." A soft knock interrupted her thoughts, and when she turned, Edward and Clara stood hesitantly at the doorway. Their once proud expressions were gone, replaced by faces pale with regret. Clara's voice trembled as she whispered, "He truly loved you. More than us." Edward lowered his eyes, his fists unclenching for the first time, and sighed, "Maybe we never understood him. Or you." For a long moment the three siblings stood in silence, the weight of years of bitterness hanging heavy between them. Amara's gaze softened, but her voice was steady. "He didn't love me more," she said gently. "He just loved me right. And you could have felt it too if you had chosen love instead of pride." Her words sank into the air like a final truth, undeniable and unshakable. She walked past them, her steps firm, her spirit unbroken, no longer the shadow they once ignored. The mansion's doors opened to her as if welcoming its rightful heir, the legacy of Mr. Thornton alive within her. That night, under the starlit sky, Amara whispered her last goodbye, not as the forgotten daughter, but as the true heiress of his heart, ready to begin a new chapter that was hers alone.